We've got 1,000 World War II games, a decent handful of Vietnam games. I mean, even the War on Terror has a couple of games. Well, I mean, what are we considering Rainbow Six Siege? But when it comes to games about the Cold War, there is absolutely nothing. Sure, there are a few games that dabble in it, Call of Duty Black Ops and Call of Duty Cold War, Twilight Struggle, maybe even DEF CON. I mean, I would consider it Cold War-ish, but none of them really nail it. None of them feel like they're actually about the Cold War. I mean, let's look at some of the games I just mentioned. So, Call of Duty, Black Ops, 1, 2, and 3 sort of cover the Cold War, and then, of course, Call of Duty Cold War. And I do like the Black Ops series a lot, might be the actual peak of COD. I mean, it has mind control, Vietnam, implying you're the one who killed JFK. You have to understand the numbers, Mason. It's a really good story, but it is in no way realistic. It obviously plays a lot more like Jason Bourne or some Mission Impossible movie than an actual look at what the Cold War was like for the average soldier. And I've said this a million times, don't start commenting. Games don't have to be realistic. But other than parts of the game taking place in Vietnam, the game is just an FPS with some Cold War setting. And I'm not even going to talk about Call of Duty Cold War, because it's really just more of the same with even less basis in historical reality. Now, DEF CON is really cool, but it doesn't really simulate the Cold War. It simulates the Cold War going hot. If you've ever played the game, I actually think it's pretty cool. You take the role of a nation, and all you try to do is minimize casualties you take and maximize the casualties of your enemy by dropping warheads on them. There are no real politics, and it is impossible to avoid nuclear war in the game. The whole point of the game is to enact nuclear Armageddon, which is obviously counterintuitive to the real-world goals of the US and USSR. If you really wanted to make a Cold War game that works and is semi-accurate, it wouldn't be about firefights or kill counts. It would be about espionage, influence, control. You're not trying to win a war, you're trying to avoid one, while expanding your power in the shadows. The whole point of the Cold War is about expanding your control without giving any opposing powers too many reasons to be upset or justify a war with you. I think honestly the first big problem for why Cold War games don't work is that most game needs clear enemies in a clear victory condition. I mean, let's look at World War II, probably the most popular war to make video games around. It's pretty easy. Nazis are bad, allies are good. I'm not disagreeing with that statement, by the way. You shoot your way into Berlin and roll credits. That's the game. No thought really required. The Cold War, it just isn't that simple. It's not a war about battles, it's a war about systems. Capitalism versus communism, democracy versus authoritarianism. It's fought with ideas and influence, not tanks and airstrikes. Most of the real Cold War happened in smoke-filled rooms, underground bunkers, or proxy states half a world away from the countries that were actually controlling them. Try pitching that to a publisher who wants a fast-paced, action-packed experience. Hey, what if we made a game where you're the head of the CIA and your win condition is to destabilize Chile and get a new president in charge without triggering nuclear war? I mean, that is obviously such a hard sell for any publisher looking to make their money back. There's just not an audience for that type of game, or a big one at least. Here's another issue. The Cold War doesn't fit neatly into good versus evil, which many games like to have. That just makes things a lot easier. The Cold War is a pretty morally gray mess. You've got America backing brutal regimes in the name of freedom. And there are a couple rather infamous examples, like in Chile with Pinochet. He came into power with a US-backed coup, and then we helped his regime murder, torture, and disappear thousands of political opponents, and America just had no issue with it. Or look at Indonesia, after we helped another madman come into power after a massive anti-communist purge, and almost 1 million people were killed. America had no issue with morally questionable people as long as they were anti-communist. And of course, on the other side of the conflict, you had the Soviet Union crushing dissent while pretending to be the voice of the worker. There are quite a numerous amount of examples, like when they rolled tanks into Poland or Romania, all because they no longer wanted to be part of a Soviet republic. And of course, you have got a dozen smaller nations that are just caught in the middle trying to survive by not taking sides or being forced to take sides so that they don't get couped themselves. That's not a story most AAA games want to tell. It's messy, it's political, and it's going to be pretty hard to boil down into a linear campaign with a satisfying ending. If you make a Cold War game that's accurate, you risk alienating people. If you simplify it, it stops feeling like the Cold War at all. So most devs just don't bother. They either skip it, or they use it as a backdrop for an action game, like the Call of Duty example. In order for a Cold War game to work, you would need mechanics for funding coups, propping up puppet governments, juggling public opinion back home, balancing diplomacy with intimidation, and knowing when not to act. Along with economy building and making sure that your conventional military, which you would never actually get to use, is still up to par with the rest of the world. I think maybe the best representation of what an actual Cold War game would look like or could look like is the New Order, a Hearts of Iron 4 mod. It already simulates a lot of the mechanics I just named, such as only using proxy wars to expand influence, or using spy networks to achieve your goals, and managing your population's happiness and war weariness, while making sure you come out of every conflict politically unscathed. But even then, that's not a perfect representation because the game doesn't focus too much on nuclear brinkmanship. There are a few scenarios where both sides can come close to using nukes on each other, but it seems like no matter how much the world heats up, neither side cares too much. Or maybe something like Suzerain would be a better representation of Cold War games, but in that game you don't actually play as a nuclear power. You're just one of the smaller nations trying to survive in a Cold War. Ultimately, a real Cold War game couldn't just have painting the map be the ultimate goal, which most strategy games tend to lean towards. And honestly, it should be impossible to paint the map in a Cold War game. But that kind of game, it's not sexy, it's slow, it's rather political, and it's pretty hard to put in a trailer. A lot of these points go along with the points I made in my other video about why there aren't a lot of political games. Players want action, they want immediate rewards, they want to conquer worlds and have people bend to their will. And in a realistic game about the Cold War, it would have none of that. The Cold War just doesn't work in games because most games aren't built to handle it. Most engines aren't built to handle it. Even Paradox was attempting to make a Cold War game, but they just canceled it because it probably wouldn't be fun. Players want action, and the Cold War gives you silence. They want heroes, the Cold War gives you spy masters and bureaucrats. In fact, most heroes that we think of from the Cold War were people who were able to help avoid the nuclear exchange. I think the most famous example would be Stanislav Petrov, who was a lieutenant colonel who was stationed at an early warning site for the Soviet Union, and they received a report that 5 nuclear missiles were launched towards the USSR. Now, what he was supposed to do was send it up the chain of command, which most likely would have led to a full-scale retaliatory strike. But he chose not to, because he thought that it was just a malfunction in the system. Why would the US only send 5 nuclear missiles? And of course, because we're still alive, he was right. But you can't really make a game out of that. There's not too much interactivity in that scenario. You could never make a game about him or include him in a game. That's just, that's just not fun. He saved the world. He is a hero. But there's nothing you can really do with the scenario he found himself in. As I mentioned, players, they want explosions. They want action. The Cold War was about avoiding action and explosions at all costs. But that's almost theoretically why it should work. It's tense, it's dramatics, it is the highest stakes. And if a developer ever figures out how to build a game around that tension, not the action, not the wars, but the tension there, they'll have something truly special. Until then, I guess we'll just have to keep on fighting World War II again and again and again. But maybe one day a Cold War game will come out. It seems like gamers' appetites for slower, less action-packed games are growing. So maybe in the future we'll get a game that will actually attempt to simulate what the world had to live through from the 50s to the 90s. But, I don't know. I wouldn't hold my breath. So that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching and, hopefully liking and subscribing. But that's all I got, so please remember that Jesus loves you.